The English imagine we can do nothing without their help, but that is not true. Not if we believe in Scotland. Not if we believe in ourselves. Why should other countries have their colonies and not Scotland? Why should Scotland be left out? Are we more stupid than they? Less enterprising? Less ingenious? Less hardworking? I think not. It cannot be. It can be done. It can be done. This will be a national endeavor, a source of pride for every Scot, a promise of wealth for every subscriber, a promise of greatness for Scotland. Overnight, this poor small nation will join the ranks of the rich and mighty. If we but act wisely and boldly, trade will increase trade, and money will beget money, and the trading world shall need no more to want work for their hands, but will rather want hands for their work. And Darien, gentlemen, I offer you the door of the seas and the keys of the universe. That's a section from Alistair Beaton's play Caledonia. Sorry, I blanked on his last name there for a second. Alistair Beaton's play Caledonia, which is a contemporary Scottish history play about the unsuccessful attempt in the 1690s to build a Scottish empire overseas. I don't know that much about it as an actual historical event, so what I'm going to talk about is what occurs in the play, not necessarily the historicity of the thing itself. But basically, in an attempt to compete with great trading empires, England, France, the Netherlands, etc., in the 1690s, William Patterson. William Patterson. I'm having trouble with first names in this video for whatever reason. William Patterson, who was one of the founders of the Bank of England, came up with the idea that Scotland should form its own joint stock company on the model of the East India Company, and that they would establish a colony and begin international trade in order to bring money into Scotland. Things did not go swimmingly necessarily, and the first portion of the play is about Patterson's attempts to... he actually managed to convince people pretty well in Scotland that this was a good idea, but then he ran into difficulties raising money in the first portion of the play. Initially, he raises money in London. People in London, people in England, love Patterson. They're like, yeah, this guy helped found the Bank of England. He's a fucking genius. I'd give him my money for anything. Then, King William steps in and basically says, hey, if Scotland has a joint stock trading company, that's going to compete with English merchants, and even though I'm technically King of Scotland as well as King of England, no. Scotland can't have a joint stock company. Scotland does have a joint stock company, but they can't raise money in England. So, we get this scene where Patterson has to give back all of the money that he's raised in England. Then he goes abroad to the continent, and then we have this interesting bit here. We have a servant who talks directly to the audience and says, "We will now pander to popular prejudice by offering a short and faintly anachronistic scene in which a number of foreigners are caricatured in an unacceptable manner. Any members of the audience who find this offensive may ask for their money back, though they will not get it. Thank you." And then we start scene 8. A few bars of appropriate national music announce each caricature as he opens a window or emerges through a door. The French merchant has a beret and a baguette. The German merchant has sausages and wears lederhosen. The Dutch merchant wears clogs, carries tulips, and is perhaps dressed as a windmill. The Danish merchant is dressed as a Viking. So, Patterson then goes abroad. He goes to continental Europe to try and raise money. He's initially successful, but then King William basically sends a message to the capital cities of Europe and is like, don't give the Scots any money. At which point, everybody who had invested from the European continent was like, I'm going to need that cash back, son. So Paterson goes home to Scotland empty-handed. They raise the money among the Scots. Paterson makes and they're building these great ships. They're building like very large ships, fantastic ships. They've got supplies. They've got all the stuff that they need. Everything is being done in-house, in Scotland itself. And then Paterson makes a fateful decision. He figures, all right, the English pound sterling is at a low value right now. The value is depressed. So if we invest part of the money that we've raised in pounds sterling, when the value goes back up, we will have more money. Which makes sense. It's a risk, but it's a decently reasonable approach to finance. The problem is the guy that Paterson entrusts this money to decides that he would rather steal that money than invest it. So a lot of the money is lost. People in the company lose confidence in Paterson. Paterson gets ousted as one of the counselors. And the next set of counselors. So Paterson is really the driving force behind a lot of this. But then the next set of counselors end up not doing fantastically well. One of the big things that Paterson had insisted on was that the food on the ships be stored in a particular way in order to protect it from spoiling, from getting damaged by seawater, etc., etc. And we find out in one of the first major setbacks after the ships have departed Scotland, we find out that the counselors who replaced Paterson did not check the food supplies. So within the first couple of weeks of a several-month-long voyage, they're down to quarter rations, basically. Like they're getting substantially less food than they really need in order to survive. And Paterson is like, I told you, why didn't you do the thing that I told you? And they were like, because everybody else involved in this thing is kind of incompetent. So we've got all those things going on. Then they land in this area called Darien, which they rechristen Caledonia after the ancient name for Scotland. Basically, Caledonia, Darien is a portion of Panama, I guess. So the idea here, the reason that they have chosen this particular place, Paterson explains this in the big sort of reveal scene where he tells them where Scotland's colony is going to be founded. He says, I propose that we send a fleet to Central America, a Scottish expedition to occupy the Gulf of Darien, here, pointing at a globe, the narrowest part of the Isthmus of Panama that links North and South America. On the one side the Atlantic, on the other the Pacific, two great oceans separated by one tiny neck of land. Across this tiny neck of land we build a trading road, linking the two oceans. At a stroke the whole shape of the world trade is transformed. The journey to Asia is halved. The time and expense of navigation to China, halved. To Japan, halved. To the Spice Islands, halved. The sale of European goods, doubled. And for every journey across the isthmus, the merchants of the world will pay us a levy. Scotland will control the flow of commodities from east to west, and from west to east. We will be the proprietors of this land called Darien. We shall give laws unto both oceans. We shall be the arbiters of the commercial world. Basically, the plan is to build a land version of the Panama Canal. right? The Panama Canal, when it was built a couple of centuries later, under U.S. control largely, revolutionized world trade. You no longer had to sail around South America to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. You could sail between the continents. It made everything massively, massively easier. What Patterson is envisioning in this play is the same exact thing, except done over land and done by the Scots in the 1690s. It's actually a brilliant plan. The problem is, when they get to Darien, they find out that actually there's issues with disease. They don't have enough food, in part because the food that they had stored up was not packed properly. People are dying at like really significant rates. Like a dozen members of the expedition a day are dying. It's very sandy and marshy, and it's difficult to build the town. It's difficult to build their fort. The indigenous peoples are not hostile to them. They're not unfriendly necessarily, but the Spanish are not particularly chuffed with the Scots being there. And more importantly, King William is not pleased with the Scots being there. So King William actually issues a declaration that anybody who trades with the Scots at Darien will face the displeasure of the king, which basically means you lose trading privileges in England. So actually we do get one scene where a French merchant ship stops at the colony at Caledonia and is basically like, yeah, we're not trading anything with you because King William has said that the English will be pissed, and it's not worth it to us to trade with you and lose the opportunity to trade with the English. So basically the colony declines. It's poorly managed. There's class tensions between the workers/sailors and the counselors who are largely staying on the ships and seem to be keeping the best food for themselves, etc., etc. So we've got all of those elements going on. And essentially that's sort of the central narrative of this play, is we have this great hope built up in the first portion of the play. Things seem to be going well. Things seem to be on the road to success. And then everything kind of collapses, and the entire expedition is a disaster. A massive portion of the collective wealth of Scotland is drained away, and there's really nothing to show for it. So that's essentially what we get in the play. The other element that I think is really, really important, and there's a lot of stuff, like the bit that I had started out with, this idea of like Scotland standing on its own and being an independent nation, etc., etc. That's all really quite contemporary issues as well. This play premiered in 2010. There was a Scottish referendum for independence by 2014. So the independence campaign was definitely ongoing at this point. There is this long history in Scotland of opposition to English rule, obviously. But we've also got these characters, this sort of chorus, who plays whatever parts they need to play. Additional sort of counselors. There's a bunch of random aristocrats who come in and give money and stuff like this. The workers and sailors of the Caledonia expedition. They're called the nameless of the earth. And so we get these class tensions as well, really, really significantly built up. And there's some self-conscious elements to it. Like, I like this bit here from relatively near the end, about 3/4 of the way through, 2/3 of the way through. The first nameless says, "I never really wanted to play the part of a sailor." Second nameless says, "Oh, I suppose you wanted to be King William, did you?" First nameless says, "Aye, King William, that'd have done for me." Third nameless, "You could never be a King William, look at you." Second nameless, who looks at the first nameless, "He's right, you know." Fourth nameless, "I'd like to play a rich man in Edinburgh. You know, one of them who spends all day in coffee houses telling people why it's only right and proper he earns about 2,000 times what I do." First nameless, "That'd be nice." Second nameless, "Aye, that'd be nice." So we get this social class commentary, which I also think is really, really important here. Because again, in the context of 2010, we're at this sort of peak period of neoliberalism and this sort of unconstrained capitalism, or also this is not the 90s neoliberalism where people are like, yay, neoliberalism. This is the point mid 2000s into the 2010s where people start to say, actually, this is kind of shit. Neoliberalism kind of sucks. The class divides, the wealth and income inequality, the destruction of public services, public works, etc., etc., to privatize them. All of this stuff isn't necessarily good. It isn't necessarily working on behalf of the majority of people. So you get this sort of shift, and that element of working class resistance to the aristocracy, to the wealthy, to the owners of the means of production is really, really significant.